to dive in. And I guess Marc-Antoine, since you kind of started this off, do you want to?
Oh, I was going to say maybe I should let Tim begin because he started the CDL itself.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Tim. I'll try to redo that summary I did last time we did a summary. We came together as a group because basically I met a lot of engineers online, mostly software engineers, more from that angle than from the academic side of debate. All kind of with a similar idea, a recognition of the problem that we have online right now with the state of debate, and a similar idea of potential solution for this, which would be sort of a single place you could go to get all the pros and cons of any claim or any debate, any argument. It's like you want to know if something is true. Maybe there's no such thing as truth, but there is certainly online lots of arguments that have been made in favor of something and against it, and a lot of evidence that's been presented. And what we wanted was one place you could go to, like Wikipedia, that always pulls it all together in one view. We think that the technology should enable that. And yet it hasn't really coalesced yet into having something like that. So that's essentially what we're in one way or another trying to build. My view is sort of like a Wikipedia. It's a single place. The word canonical, we call it the canonical debate, and there are different meanings of the word canonical. One is it's like the definitive place to go to find this information. Another meaning of canonical, we kind of are still tossing back and forth and trying to figure out, which is if you're going to have all the information gathered in a single place, what you need is sort of a deduplication, the canonical or singleton expression of any one given claim. This thing is true or false, or I agree with this thing or disagree with it. And so canonical means that we don't have duplicates. We pulled it all together, and we always have some way to deduplicate. What's that? I heard somebody talking. Okay. So that's kind of the second meaning of canonical that we're working on. I think there's a general consensus that there's an information architecture type solution to the problem that we see. So we're trying to figure out the right way to build that. And one of the things we hope we get out of this is just a much more efficient way for community knowledge, the common knowledge, to accumulate, right? You have one place to put all your evidence for or against something, and that helps everybody at the same time see that information, as opposed to the much more scattered and disorganized way that we see in real life and on the internet. I guess that's my summary.
Yeah, so, and one thing we've also talked about, canonical one place to go, but it could be, and we're hoping it be distributed. So
that's one of the points of contention.
Resource. Yeah. So that's even though it's called canonical, it's kind of a shared or interoperability between systems and linking and kind of all the other stuff. Since Pete and Michael are here from OGM, a lot of the OGM concepts are also in here, as far as information being free and open and reusable. And then
I think like conceptually, it's like a URL or URI, right? Where it doesn't matter what's happening behind the scenes. What you want is, as a user, to have that one address you go to and find that information, regardless of how it's actually maintained and distributed and that sort of thing. You just want to look in one place and get your answer.
Yeah. Whether federated or centralized should not matter. the goal is, and one important goal of Tim's that I totally subscribe to is that even if it's a distributed federated architecture, which I'm a proponent of, it must be engineered in such a way that it does not allow easy creation of information bubbles. Like the global view must always be at most one click away. So that's part of the desiderata of the system. And the story is we've been haggling that architecture for 2 years now, because it's part of the problem is not that hard to state. And part of it, of course, the devil's in the detail. When people don't agree on the meaning of words, that means the relationship between words and concepts inside the head is complex. It's a many-to-many relationship. One concept has many names. One name can designate many different concepts. And what we have is a relationship between words or sentences or phrases. And we're trying to infer something that's happening at the concept level and helping people to align on concept using words which are imperfect translations thereof. So we're looking at that part of the architecture. What are the common identifiers? Are they linguistic, non-linguistic, mixed, and so on? So that's one aspect. Another thing we spend a lot of time on is the layering and boundaries between different subsystems. Like Tim is very much custodian of the ecosystem of claims as abstracted from their provenance. Like, let's look at a claim, no matter who said it, no matter where it came from, so we can avoid ad hominem attacks and all that. And I'm saying, yes, but we also need a system where provenance is there, because there is a lot of absolutely fundamental information in provenance, and we're trying to map public discourse. And that means we need to have the links to the public discourse. And there is agreement on that, but they're separate subsystems. And how do these boundaries translate in information architecture? Like, there are conversations, there are curated conversations, and there is this kind of idealized neutral point of view, Wikipedia-like repository of claims, and how does the information flow between these is part of what we are discussing. What else is important? In terms of how do we deduplicate? Deduplication of claims requires some analysis. A lot of us are in line that it will most likely be kind of more formal language as opposed to statistical machine learning type analysis, because we want humans to be able to argue about this. Are those really the same claims? Are those not really the same claims? So there has to be at least a symbolic expression so that humans can be in charge. But if we have formal expression, we can't ask everybody to learn formal languages. And that means the notion that every formal expression must have a natural language expression, A, and B, formalization must be progressive. You can contribute without having a knowledge of any formal system, but you can enter natural language. And if appropriate, people like the system may use natural language, machine learning things to propose other natural language expressions of that and say, well, do you mean this? Do you mean that? Or something else? And then it can be, there can be human and or machine computer assisted processes to progressively translate a vague natural language sentence into something more formal. And the reason to do that is that it's easier to deduplicate formal representation of claims than their natural language expression. This we're still arguing out, actually, but the notion that if there's any formalization, it must be progressive, it must be human intelligible. I think that's part of consensus. I see hands raised. Go ahead.
I was just raising it on behalf of Carl because I don't know if you see his icon. Go ahead, Carl.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't know if formalization is necessary in order for the humans to be in charge rather than computers. Like, I would say natural language also works. Like, when I think of these problems, I think in natural language terms, not formal terms. And so I think it's more.
Yeah.
That part is still contentious. Yes.
Yeah, and we disagree on most everything. Just so.
I think it's more a system design. Like, does the recommendation sort of overrule human input, or does when a human says no, actually these things are not the same, or they are the same, does that then put them together for that person's view only, or for maybe a group of people related to that person, or for the whole system? So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I don't think formalism doesn't have to be attached with.
So these are the kinds of arguments we have on a daily basis. This is very typical. It's perfectly valid. I really think this is useful work, but it's slow and a bit painstaking because there's a lot of nitpicking, which I think is important. What's a concept? What's equivalence? What's a claim? What's an argument? Do we want to represent single premise or multiple premise arguments? And if we have single premise, how do we handle composition? These are the kinds of things our group is busy with on a daily basis.
And I thought it might be helpful also to get a feeling for how, when we come together and how we well, let me just say it. So like Tim kind of mentioned, we all met online. We each have our own kind of systems, and we're trying to either build a system together, which we can't ever agree on, or have the systems have interoperable layers. So that's the one things we're discussing. But so Michael Grossman's the founder of Factor, but we have people from Ysaurus, Gullybot, Tim has Gruff, Debate Map, Soccer Cheese. So it's really
Idealoom.
Idealoom, right? Yeah. So it's really just a collaboration among creators that are each doing our own little experiments, and then we hope one day we'll agree on something and build a system together.
Right. The point is to have a shared representation layer at the very least. A lot of us are big on interoperability because a lot of work on identifying claims and arguments has been done by others online, and it would be good to be able to reuse some of that, Debatepedia and the like. But yeah, it's what level of formalization do we want and do we need? But certainly unformalized data is useful. That is.
Yeah. The existing systems on the online we've definitely looked at, and they definitely got kind of the low-hanging fruit, and it seems like the next kind of level of improvement, the next leap, will take a pretty big restructuring of the data, which is kind of what we found.
Yeah, a lot of us have worked with basic argument structure, and some of us got a lot of mileage out of it, and some of us are deeply dissatisfied with it, and that's me, of course. I'm usually the contrarian in this group, and I believe that argumentation, for me, and here we're really wearing my hat and not the CDL hat. Argumentation is a kind of surface representation, and the deep representation is the kind of underlying causal matrix and value matrix, an epistemic matrix. So how different statements support one another, and how different situations are expected to cause or at least impact other situations. And yeah.
I was just going to pop in and say, we also kind of agree on the final kind of goal. We want a system with all these different things, with a mix of human and machine language for where it's appropriate, and a lot of these things. Different people are kind of focusing on different pieces of the pie to get there. So I'm focusing on non-voting kind of scoring, right? And Tim's focused on the canonicality, and Marc Antoine is thinking about how can people build their own knowledge trees and then have comparisons and
merging, diffing and
stuff
merging
like
of knowledge representation.
And
Felix is thinking a lot about moderation and the personal scoring aspects, among other things.
So a lot of the time we're arguing about kind of what to work on first, and when we're trying to make it move, then someone else, it breaks someone else's system. So a lot of the challenge is finding how we can move forward without excluding the other.
I think Stephen should talk because he's also one of the strong stakeholders in the group.
I can talk, I just don't know what to emphasize. I can highlight that my primary take on argumentation is to make it more accessible to everyday users. Like not just to, my main take was from reading research. There was a lot of formalization being done in these highly formalized systems that experts can use. And a lot of that work is interesting and relevant, but like how do you even have a tiny subset of that, and how can you make it usable, in other words, to everyday users online on the web. So my main focus is a human-computer interaction angle, which is the field I originate from.
So maybe Michael and Pete, and you want to present yourself and or ask questions.
I definitely have questions to ask. Without presenting, I'll just say about Factor that it is a place where people gather, organize, and share or don't share content that can be links or posts, images, video, podcasts, you name it. People pull stuff together and organize it and tag it. And I guess my big question in listening is the question of, and it sounds like this is a subject of some debate, but a place to go versus a system that whether the place to go is distributed or not, the place to go could exist, but whether this is a system for people to adopt almost a labeling linkage that says, there is analysis of this, and here's where you'll find it, but people don't have to know about it already to take advantage of it. It shows up all over the place. I guess just that question of the degree to which it shows up all over, as opposed to being like Wikipedia. You don't see there is a Wikipedia entry on this subject that explains it. You have to know to go to Wikipedia, which is fine at this point because a lot of people know about Wikipedia, but I'm sure there are people who don't. That kind of distribution is a question.
I'll answer from the founder of the CDL perspective and from our white paper perspective. I usually speak on behalf of the white paper since I was the main person to write it. But the approach I'm looking towards is like a Wikipedia approach where people go to it. But the point is that the barriers should be really low. The advantage of people going to something like Wikipedia is it's not a huge ask to go to Wikipedia, right? It's really simple and easy to do, and it's something very explicit. People know to look something up right there and what they're going to get. If it's You know, the other way around, where either it's like a plug and an add-on or built into the infrastructure. If it's built into the infrastructure of the web, it'll probably never happen because you got to get standards. Wikipedia has made itself essentially a de facto place, and it's sort of answering. It's answering a very basic question, which is, where do I go to find out this? Is this thing true? How do I find out? And right now, the work you have on Twitter or Facebook or personal conversation, whatever, is like, well, just Google it. Okay, so Google right now perhaps is the place you go to get the answer to that question. And it's not a good place to find an answer, or just one answer, especially. In my mind, it would be a thing that people are aware of, because that feeds into two separate things. One, it's where you go to find the answer, but it's also, once it's a household name like Wikipedia, it's where you go to contribute to the answer, because you have to ask the same question of, how do I contribute? And I don't see that being easily adopted as either an add-on layer that's everywhere on the internet, or being built into the actual protocol. I mean, I could be wrong.
I think there's many right answers to this question. And I understand Tim's perspective, and I don't disagree with it, but I'd like to enrich it a bit. I certainly would want something, whether it's a browser plugin or an easy JavaScript library you add into your system, or something that allows you to, yes, hey, there seems to be those claims that you want to look at where they fit in the broader structure. What I hope is to build a kind of reference implementation that anybody can use on their side, so they can do their local argument map. That's my plan. This is not CDL plan, but I want to explain how they interact. Everybody could have this JavaScript library on their system, and then they could have a local map. Here are the local arguments on this text, and you click a button, and then you see, okay, how do those arguments are embedded in the global map? So you'd have a kind of, and there, whether you're asking a distributed system or a site, shouldn't matter, you get a map of, here's your arguments, here's as a subnetwork of a bigger argument. So you get, here are other reasons to believe or disbelieve whatever is claimed that you missed. Here are other alternatives to the problem, your questions you asked that you missed. Here are, here's a broader picture at all times. By the way, one of the reasons we have a bit of discussion on should we have provenance is something I'd really like to have in that map, in the maps I'm interested in, is which parts of this is consensual, which part is fringe, which part is polarizing. And that requires knowing who said what. And that's a view. And there's another view where that is not even there, and that's fine. They're both valuable. And one strong belief I have is this is going to be an ecosystem at some point. There's going to be more than one view, more than one way to represent that stuff. I want it to be a shared web of knowledge, but where people can develop their own views and their own visualization and their own embeddings. That's my long-term vision on this. Again, I don't think there's any contradiction. I'm trying to give more emphasis.
Yeah, a quick just reaction to that. That is part of the white paper vision. It talks about an ecosystem, right? And so it's completely compatible with what I'm thinking. Just like Wikipedia, Wikipedia is less tool oriented, but Wikipedia is automatically on Google searches now will provide, is the source for the quick definitive answer sort of thing, right? But there should be all sorts of tooling for visualizing and for using. One thing we discussed recently was, how my hope is at some point when reporters are writing an article, rather than people debating about, is this the claim they're making? Is that the claim they're making? Is this the evidence? The actual author would be aware of okay, this is what I'm saying here, and this is what I'm saying there, and this is what I'm saying there, and connecting it to the canonical debate. As for, you know, canonical debate versus infrastructure or a place you go to, I think the brand name is important. It needs to have a name so that people can automatically think of it as the thing that provides this information to me, right? And so that's why I think of it as Wikipedia or something, a place you go to. Right?
Do you feel you had your question answered?
Yeah, I just to clarify it a little bit, the one part I'm not really sure about. I mean, I got the more distributed picture from you, Marc-Antoine, and I was wondering about, I was imagining, when I asked the question, I was imagining something more like let's just imagine that on participating websites around the web now, you saw a little W on anything that, you know, that there was information to be gleaned from Wikipedia on it. So that if you didn't know about Wikipedia, you know, the sites that we're all working on and that are, you know, aligned with us would be having this little CDL. I know that wouldn't be the name, but you know, logo on it. So that would be what's distributed. The destination would be there, but you wouldn't have to know about the destination in advance to discover it. So that was kind of the degree of distribution that I was initially thinking about.
It sounds like a viable scenario, not to the exclusion of other viable scenarios, but yes.
So maybe, I don't know, Pete and Felix, I forgot your guest name. If y'all want to.
So Johannes, yeah. Hi. Yeah, do you want to go? Shall I just introduce myself because I'm new to the group, and yeah, I just wanted to listen a little bit. It's extremely interesting to me. I'll just introduce myself very quickly. So I'm a PhD student from Aachen, and I think, or I'm in a domain that is very adjacent to what you're doing with the canonical debate lab. So I'm doing my PhD in opinion dynamics, or broadly speaking. So I'm interested in how simple rules of local psychological interactions can play out on a systematic level. So phenomena like polarization or consensus and so on. And on the group level and on a societal level, it's very difficult to simulate and to research empirically, but there are some very interesting branches of research emerging at the moment. Like what I'm doing is partly agent-based modeling, and so I've been reading about the topic for about 2 years, and every now and again I've been talking to my supervisor, and he also knows Felix, and whenever I told him about an idea of myself, he told me, "Oh, I have this other guy who has also very similar ideas like you," and that's basically how we got in touch. And yeah, over the last couple of months, we've been working on a project together, and we've realized that we have very similar ideas in that too. And yeah, I've been starting to think about ideas how to incentivize users to be more productive in debate. So one area that really interests me a lot about social media is what incentives it sets for users to participate, basically. And I think some are very, very unproductive in the current social media landscape. So my main focus on the ideas that I've been toying with are in the direction of how can you set up a protocol of how users are going to interact so that the debate is going to be productive or steers towards a productive end. Because, for example, some incentives in for example, Twitter would be to get as much attention as possible, and I think that's not a very good incentive. And there's also a performative element to it. So you're trying to get a raise out of someone else and increase your profile with it. Yeah,
this is something I'm also working in, very similar to what I'm working on. My focus, it's a project. My project is called Liberati, and I'm building technologies to make conversations and social platforms more intelligent, less polarizing, and very much focused on incentives. And I've been doing a lot of research in that area. So I'd love to talk to you in more detail about that.
Yeah, my reaction to that is that I'm almost afraid to talk to you about it, because you know, a lot of what I'm the standard bearer for, and that's in the white paper, is a series of design goals that at its foundation are meant exactly to have that outcome, and are completely based on assumptions I have made, right? So I know that there are sources of bias in debate. So one of my solutions is nobody owns a claim, right? The claim it stands as it is. It's a proposition that's been made, and it doesn't matter who said it. So you remove the sayer from the bias, right? The way it's structured and the deduplication is meant to remove biases around, you know, somebody gaining a louder voice through repetition or through other rhetorical approaches, that sort of thing. There's a lot of things in the design that I believe are meant to produce a more productive debate, including things around scoring, including things around don't declare a winner. I think we're all on the same page here that the debate system is never, first of all, no debate is ever over. It's never closed. And second of all, there's never a winner. The winner is in the person themselves decide whether they agree or not. And you need to give them that space. Otherwise, you create the bifurcation where you declared a winner and they say, but they're wrong. And so I'm going to go hold my own debate elsewhere, right? So there's a lot of things built into it that are exactly trying to promote a more, how did you say, a constructive outcome. But I have my own assumptions, and I'm afraid but interested to see what you think about these different things. And that goes into a lot of our disagreements about, or I won't say disagreements, our focus, right? That's why I'm focused on this neutral, as we've lately been calling it, structure versus a more personal conversation.
Right. I realize we should have invited there's a few more stakeholders who are not here. One is Jamie Joyce of Society Library. Sorry, Pete, I'll just take a few minutes to present Jamie. She's basically doing mapping of social conversations. So she does big concept graphs of what is being said and by whom. So for her, the by whom is important because it's about representing the state of the social conversation on big topics, climate change, and so on. So it's, again, concept cartography. So that way it's very connects to what we're doing. But unlike Tim, she also wants to have provenance. The other person who is not the part of the group, but I'm wearing another hat sometimes, is Topic Quests, and they're working on gamifying better interactions. So if we're going to speak about incentives, I don't think this should be CDL time, but we should plan a conversation about incentives and gamification at some point. End of parenthesis, Pete.
I just had a quick comment. Yeah, I just had a quick comment that the way I see associating identity with claims is not so much like this is the person who claims this or this person stands for this claim, but just this is the person who created this representation in the system. So it's almost like mining. you know, like some people who, you know, and that gives you the opportunity to reward people or to have them recognized, or like, these are the claims I've added, and this is the utility they provided. I personally really enjoy coming to Stack Overflow and seeing, okay, which questions have been useful, you know, over the past whatever month, you know, which ones, you know, have got a lot of activity, you know, which ones continue to be useful, you know, decades later or whatever, like, well, not decades, but a decade later. And so my interest in provenance, or in, you know, provenance, I think we use it two different ways, like who created something in a system or versus who said something where. Maybe I'm misusing the term. My idea with identity with terms is not so much to associate people with the things being said, as in like I'm a stakeholder in this argument, this claim being true, but more just I'm the person who happened to add this to the system. You know, maybe it needs to be improved later, and maybe it'll fade into, you know, more obscurity because someone came up with a better way of representing it. It's now sort of taken over, or maybe it remains like, oh yeah, that's just a very succinct way of describing that claim, and it has broad appeal on people who tend to disagree about its truth. At least it's how they would agree on a shared representation for it. So that's I just wanted to put that in there, that, you know, associating some sort of identity with the name is
again,
not,
a perfectly
authorship.
yeah, authorship.
Again, a perfectly typical CDL conversation. What are the pros and cons of keeping that information and of representing that information? I want to keep it. I see Tim's points of not representing it sometimes, and I see the importance of representing it sometimes for other purposes.
Right. One thing we step in a lot is we end up taking the extreme positions. Like I think people here would think I am totally against that sort of thing. And that's not actually true. I see the value of, you know, reputation, especially in terms of promoting valuable contribution versus not. You know, I've seen interesting gamification on the blockchain of contributing to the conversation in helpful ways versus unhelpful ways, and actually even monetary rewards, that sort of thing. And it's like, if we need that sort of thing, I'm all for that. You know, I'm all against it to the point it starts introducing bias into the discussion. And so that's where we always come across discussing. Yeah.
Multiple views.
Maybe as a quick side note on the debate of whether or not to link identity with arguments, it might also have another dimension of when to link identity to an argument. So if you decouple it temporarily, then maybe you remove the incentive of getting the gratification that is immediate on social media at the moment. So maybe that's already enough to take out the immediacy of, or the instant thing that you have on social media at the moment.
It reminds me of how on Reddit you can have, it reminds me of how on Reddit you can hide the upvotes, downvotes for a period of time so that people, I guess, don't be influenced by, immediate popularity.
One thing that comes up, has come up several times recently in terms of user incentives, is I think like in a debate, the way debates stand these days, a lot of the incentive for a debate is either competition, like I'm winning, or, you know, I argued better than this person, I owned them, that sort of thing, or in public recognition of, you know, that I'm smarter, or, you know, I'm a thought leader, or that sort of thing. And one driver that I think, or in reputation scores where you actually gain rights or you gain extra points or something for doing the good contribution. And I think there's one, if this succeeds, very natural and powerful motivator that doesn't exist in any of these situations. It does exist in Wikipedia, which is you actually feel like you're contributing to something permanent and useful for everybody. You know, in any other discussion we have, it seems very ephemeral, and you can't get anywhere. And I think in structured right, and if it actually becomes canonical, used and known by everyone, you get that added incentive where people will contribute just because they want to contribute to the whole, right?
Yeah, you could think of that as second order incentives. In social media, they're designed for first order incentives, meaning they'll try to get you to engage. And And by incentivizing, you would say interesting information or likes. But then what'll happen is you realize that you're hating the experience because the quality of conversation is so bad, because of all the polarization, because of the negative psychological outcomes. And so there are second order effects on your behavior because of the overall negative experience. So what you're describing, Tim, is, if you create a system and you don't engineer it to incentivize people to participate directly, but by participating, they just have a great experience, that in itself is an incentive.
So I think we're getting more into discussions rather than an overview. So let me pull us back. And Pete, I don't know if you've had something that you want to say for a while, or I also have some closing comments.
I'd like to say hi, and Bentley and Marc-Antoine, thanks for inviting us. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to see a group of folks doing cool stuff. I apologize for being late. I was a little confused about when we would hold this, and I ended up thinking it wouldn't be today. I also apologize. I need to leave right before the hour to host a regular call about Massive Wiki. So I can tell you a little bit about myself, and then my main questions are actually, because there's not a lot of time before I need to leave today. My questions are actually meta stuff, participating and not wanting to disrupt your flow too much and things like that. So I have a couple things that are overlapping with what you're doing, overlapping, but different. So the one that's popped up recently for me, it's something that I've kind of been doing this year a little bit, and I will probably continue to do it a little bit for a while. It's something called emergent event sense making. So when you get something happening in the world that is really important for a bunch of people, but it happens in a very short time, and also creates a lot of confusion, and not necessarily disinformation or misinformation, but just lack of information, and something a concept I haven't quite figured out how to name yet, but it's related to information asymmetry. So there are people who know a lot about the situation, and then there are people who think they know a lot about the situation, and then there are people who don't know a lot about the situation and need to learn from the right people. So so examples for me are 9/11, what the hell just happened, who was behind it, what were the actual instances of it, are we still safe in our home, is this a war, is it not a war? So 9/11 was a big one for me. Another one was the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, around February 2020. And that lasted, maybe from January to March or beginning of April, where something was happening. We couldn't tell if it was important or not. We couldn't tell what the facts on the ground were or not. Another one was the GameStop short squeeze, which was really fascinating. I think it happened very quickly. It was kind of a mind-blowing event for the financial markets in the US, and it was kind of it felt like asymmetric warfare, where these scrappy little crazy forum people flipped a couple of derivatives traders, in the scale of billions of dollars, right? So if you're in the financial market, you need to understand what's going on really quick, because the rules, the world just changed, right? And the rules are different, and who's making money and who's losing money in hundreds of thousands and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. It's a big spike. The one I'm currently working on as kind of a model of the thing, I'm actually not working on the content, oddly enough, as much as just modeling it, is the Delta surge. So it's another event where we had asymmetric information. A lot of we had good information starting in early July, but that early good information didn't hit the mainstream until early August. And so there was a gap there where we could have been making public policy decisions much differently. And then this one is compounded by intentional and I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but there's some structural difficulties with it. We've already wound ourselves into misinformation and pandemic fatigue and things like that, so that we actually had people. July was a really interesting month because we had good information, a lot of people who didn't know what was going on, and then a lot of people purposely setting up their environments, their states in the US to be in the worst possible position for the Delta surge that was starting to hit end of July and now. So that's the one that I picked because it happens to be happening now. I'm interested in COVID-19 and Delta, and I'm especially interested in that asymmetry. One of the interesting things about emergent event sense making is you get a lot of activity in a very short time. So it's, to me, it's kind of like running a hackathon, a 24-hour hackathon. It's a way to compress time and get a lot of work done. So to that end, the current emergent event sense-making effort, I'm working on something called an intake system, where it's got some features of the canonical debate thing that you want to be building. It's got canonicality to it. It's a centralization place where I want a lot of information to flow, and kind of as much information as possible all at once. And then get chunked into canonical pieces, which I'm calling exhibits, kind of like Exhibit A in a judicial trial or something like that. So you get these exhibits. Somebody has posted information about a vaccine trial or information that has just been observed about the decline of efficacy for vaccines in certain circumstances and certain conditions. And then you can make predictions based on that for what's going to happen. Things like statements that vaccine passports are inherently racist and therefore inherently bad. The intake system is supposed to, a lot of it is human driven too, but it's supposed to kind of canonicalize all of those statements and produce not so much debate fodder, but positions, and claims more or less. A lot of times the claims are very vague and fuzzy. People are presenting positions or beliefs or data that they're starting to understand, and you can call those claims kind of, or you may have to refine them or improve them a little bit to call them claims, or coalesce a set of them, but then they end up as canonical claims, I guess. So that's the canonical part of it. I'm also designing the front end of emergent event sense making. So just making sense of stuff and being able to start to classify it. My idea is that you've got later stages that are actually going to maybe turn those into debates, maybe turn those into what I call sense making. Let's actually start to talk about the implications of it, whether or not that's true, whether or not it makes sense, and then you can start to introduce debate. I haven't been doing any of that. I'm not interested in it right now. It's just the canonicalization of what the hell is happening in the world. I have a separate but related thing. My long-term project is something called Massive Wiki, which is just the idea that we should have interoperable, simple wiki information management. And so what I've done is I've said all the stuff that we used to do with classical wikis, I've been doing wikis for 10 or 15 years, all the classical stuff that we do with regular database driven wikis, we can do those same things, but we could standardize on Markdown rather than any other wiki markup, and we could standardize on sharing and versioning files as the base unit of interchange. So that leads you, one of the best ways to do that is with Git. Git isn't the absolute thing that you need to use. You could use other things to do it. But anyway, the idea is, it's pretty simple for probably the folks here. Hey, if you take a Git repo and you use Markdown as your text representation, and then you open up your Git repo for collaboration, you can call that a wiki. And it works just like all the other wikis that we've ever had, the real classical good wikis. And then wonderful things will happen, because we don't have to have a fight over which wiki engine we're using, because we're not using an engine, right? You're using whatever tools you need to come to massive wiki space. So that's my long-term thing. The challenges there are Git is, I could talk long, I won't get distracted. But that's a lovely question. Thank you, Stephen. The challenges are that the existing tools, we're bending a couple existing tools into use, personal knowledge management systems, and they actually work pretty well. There's enough clunkiness in getting it set up to collaborate that normal people find it incredibly hard. So along with teaching people how to wiki together, we also have to teach people how to get the software set up. And that's a dual challenge, which is difficult. So we're developing some, processes to help with that. We're planning to develop software to help with that. So the questions I have, again, are kind of meta. Thanks for having us as guests. I would be interested in participating more, and how do we do that without bending your organization out of shape? How often do you have meetings, and how often do people have to attend, and things like that? And I apologize, I'm gonna have to leave in a minute.
That's fine, thank you, Pete. So just to make it quick, we have 3 meetings a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we have a Google Calendar if you want to get invited. Just, I don't know if you're in the Slack already, in our Slack.
Yeah, I use Slack.
Okay, just get to Marc-Antoine or someone who invited you, and
okay,
connect.
Awesome, and thanks. Maybe that's good enough.
Okay.
Cheers, all.
Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
I'm going to have a hard stop in 1 minute. I don't know if we want to.
I think it's a good time to close unless there's other questions.
Yeah, I do want to post, and I'll probably send everyone something, but yeah, we didn't quite get into the warning about interactions, and like Pete and several people had said, that these are very deep working sessions. It can take a long time to get up to where if you ask a question that we covered last year, it could take a whole meeting to explain it to you. So we need to figure out a way to maybe assign a buddy and have you ask questions of that person offline to save time. I'll try and write something up. But yeah, thanks everyone, and we'll be.
Thanks so much. This has been really great, and my just to say, like, I'm probably the least technical of anybody in this meeting, so I appreciate being able to be here. I may not be conversant in everything we discuss, but I bring other things, I hope.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, and thanks for all the links in the chat. I'm definitely going to be visiting them.
Do copy them. This is closing.
Yeah, saving it right now.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.